This is amazing. It is only 1:12 and we have taken only 12 minutes to get everything organized. Yeah, there's a lot of tech stuff happening because I made an extensive Canva screen share for you because I think that it's easier for us when we really look at things and hear them at the same time, right? Because otherwise it's a lot of words coming at you. So many of you who are on this call have seen some of this stuff before or have heard me talk about it. I tried to get at it from a different angle. First, let me just say, a lot of the basics of what we talk about today is in print in the Vakai project. So if you have the Vakai project, which is the book that we published in April of last year, it's almost a year ago, a lot of this stuff is there. It's available on Amazon. If you go to the belcantobootcamp.com, our website, there is a place there where you can say the book is now available and you can find it there. Maybe somebody can put a link in the chat as well. Also there, people keep asking me, why do you do all of this stuff for free? Well, that's very much Belcanto Bootcamp's mission, is to make information available for free or very little money, so that we can really kind of get on with the business of one-on-one work when we do that, because we try to teach these kinds of basics and historical things in groups. If you do want to support us, feel free to either join. You can join and become a member, and that membership supports the work that we do. We also have a fundraising campaign going on at the moment, which you can see on our website as well. It's called Annual Appeal. And so feel free, if you have $5 to give it. If you know somebody who can give $5,000, there is also options to do so in a tax deductible way. So support us. If you need our help, if you want us to visit your communities, let us know. Okay. So on with the business of the Prosodic Appoggiatura. So what we're going to try to do today is to actually practice like saying out loud. And so you don't have to have your camera on. You can have your camera on, you can have your camera off, but I encourage you, like when we get to the practice saying these slides, that you actually practice saying those words, because this is what I find a lot, is that we explain these things and then people really understand it in the moment. Dave is like, yes, raise the roof. But what happens is when you get in a situation where it comes up, you don't know exactly how to explain it. And you kind of get in a word salad about it. And so that's what I'm trying to focus on here. So what I am going to try and do that is different today from what I've done in the past is to look at it from the harmonic nature of the 4-bar phrase first. I think that very often in the past, when I have talked about the Appoggiatura, I start with Italian poetry and the basics of poetry. And unfortunately, then I lose most people already, because you have to stick with it to understand why it matters. So I decided that I'm going to go from a place where we understand the Appoggiatura in a more natural way and then kind of work our way back in history. So this is the first time I've really done it exactly in this way. So I'm looking forward to hearing you say what you think about it afterwards. So let's start. If you have the Vakai project, you're already familiar with Raindrops on Roses and Whiskers on Kittens in Italian, okay? So it is one of the chapters where Derek talks about Italian prosody in relation to how it works in the Appoggiatura. So when we look at this poem, raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied up with strings, these are a few of my favorite things. We see all of the things that we normally see in poetry of all languages, like old poetry, like old-fashioned poetry that is going to scan like a poem. We see that it's a quatrain, as lots of poetry is, like it's a quatrain. We see at the end of each line that some lines ends with a stressed syllable, like strings and things, but some lines ends with a stressed followed by unstressed syllable, like kittens and mittens. So when you look at this poem in Italian, there is a fantastic recording of it. There is a QR code in the book. You can also just search it on YouTube. You say, gocce di pioggia sul verde dei prati. These are classic Italian endecasillabi, 11 syllable words. And just like the English, the first two lines ends with a stressed and unstressed syllable, prati and felpati, and the last two end on accented words, del te and a me. And so in the basis of this idea, we have set up this very natural thing that happens in the world of the triad. And I'm sorry if lights are going to shine on me, but this is super small on my computer. I hope it's bigger on your computer. So when you think about raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied up with string, these are a few of my favorite things. Also feel free to sing along as we go through repertoire. It's nice to feel it in your body, right? So we see that this harmony is just, but these dissonant pitches, appoggiaturas that we feel correspond to these stresses in the poem. Raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens. And that is the same whether you sing it in Italian, gocce di pioggia sul verde dei prati. Yeah, and you see that when, and I have numbered the four lines to set up this idea of the 4-bar phrase and the quatrain, right? So this is really interesting, like when you just think about structure of music, how we have the quatrain and how it corresponds with the 4 bars of music. When you look at the 3rd and 4th line, you see how easy it is for us to arrive. Brown paper package is tied up with, if it was gold string, you would need 2 notes there, but you don't because you just have strings. These are a few of my favorite blue things, right? If you put extra notes, you would have to have, if you have extra syllables, you would have to have extra notes. And what are those notes? And that is really the crux of the Appoggiatura. How does that happen for the Beatles? Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. Remember to let her into your heart, then you can start to make it better. This poem does not scan as classically, but we can still feel the stresses. And you can see that we have that same thing happening. Whenever you have better, which has 2 syllables at the end of the line, you're going to see something happening. Only 1 note on bad. Take a sad song and make it better. It is in the nature of the music to vary those 2 syllables. Remember to let her into your heart. Heart has only 1 syllable. Then you can add her to make it better. And here, of course, we get into the interesting notation, because in this one example that I found, it's written to make it better, yeah, which of course is not how anybody sings it. If you look on the left of your screen, you see something like trying to make how that dissonance hangs across the bar line. Then you can start to make it right. So better, you feel this dissonant better, which is how it gets sung. I'm not like the best at singing Beatles songs, but I do love them. How does it happen in other languages and in other times? So since we're in Easter, I thought this was interesting. My first thought was to just go and find like a Bach setting of a chorale that really is just 4 lines of a simple poem. And so in fact, I found this, which is like the theme, the hymn that the Bach chorale is based on that I will show you. And we see it here in a 1609 version. And here you see there are no bar lines, but you do see long notes on Christus, der ist mein Leben. Yeah, you feel Leben has 2 syllables. It has 2 different notes. And it feels this. Sterben ist mein Gewinn. There's only 1 stress there. Dem tu mich mir and actually the old version is Dem tu ich mir ergeben, which we would now call an unprepared appoggiatura. Mit Fried war da. So when we look at Bach, and we look at that poem, we see another interesting thing. This is a sidebar about poetic meter. You see that when we are here and we have Christus, der ist mein Leben, yeah, it's normal for us because the stress is on Christus. But here, what happens with Bach is that he already starts to, when the bar lines come, we start to accept that sometimes there are going to be weird stresses. So Bach has Christus, der ist mein, right? So the first beat is on tus, and we know the word is Christus or not Christus. This we see in all kinds of poetry. We see it in Italian poetry a lot. That in fact the word stress moves around a little. So you cannot force this 4-bar 4-phrase music to become Christus, der ist mein Leben. Yeah, it doesn't work that way easily. So we accept Christus, der ist mein Leben und sterben mein Gewinn. And interestingly enough, here we see in this later version, sterben ist mein Gewinn has become und sterben mein Gewinn, because it helps the poem scan more naturally and normally. So it puts the stress on sterben on the downbeat. Und sterben mein Gewinn, dem tu ich mich ergeben. Oops, sorry, there's a G that should be blue. I knew that there were mistakes. I will have to do it again. No, you'll all have to just accept it. Mit Freud fahr ich dahin. In the original, it was Fried. Mit Fried fahr ich dahin. So if we listen to Bach, we feel these 2 notes on Leben. It's 2 different harmonies, but you can feel how it would never be. It would never be like just the same thing. Yeah, it puts a stress on Leben by how it is set. Gewinn does not need an appoggiatura because there is no straggling syllable. You see geben? That is a classic appoggiatura, harmonized. Ah, what gorgeous, gorgeous, simple music. You see a quatrain, a classic 4-bar set, a 4-phrase setting of it, and you see the appoggiatura feeling the dissonance in the places where there are multiple syllables in the moment of the arrival of the tonic poem. What about French? Au vin dissipe la tristesse qui pèse sur mon cœur, à moi les rêves à moi les rêves de l'ivresse. Again, this doesn't scan as classically, which is why I stumble, right? Because there are extra syllables here, but we feel the same thing. Tristesse, l'ivresse, that rhyme, and cœur and mon cœur, that rhymes, that does not have. And how does that influence the music that is set by Ambroise Thomas? And this we will see a simple appoggiatura version would be no appoggiatura. When we get to, again, I could have put 1, 2, 3, 4, right? You can easily see the quatrain in the setting of the poem. So here we already have the appoggiatura has varied a little, and we will see it further later. Or for those of you who already know Garcia, you will see that this is like Garcia's substitutes. We're getting to that in a hot second. One of the most famous German poems, Du holde Kunst, in wie viel grauen Stunden wo mich des Lebens wilder Kreis umstrickt. Hast du mein Herz zu warmer Lieb entzünden, hast mich in eine bessere Welt entrückt. You see, again, the first and the third line has two syllables at the end of it. Umstrickt and entrückt ends only in stresses. And when we look at what Schubert does with this prosody that he is dealing with, we find no appoggiatura, right? Because Kunst in, right? There is no reason for it to be other than in wie viel Grauen. So if you follow the dissonance, you find the prosody. Du holde Kunst in wie viel grauen Stunden, wo mich des Lieb, could also maybe have been, right? You could imagine that that is a variation of it. Yeah, no appoggiatura because umstrickt has only one stressed syllable. Two different notes, even though the first one is not dissonant, we have two different notes on Herz. Here we see one version of the writing out of the appoggiatura. We have a small note that replaces the big one. You could also sing Zunden, but the classic way is to just replace the big note with the little note and to sing Warme Liebe entzünden, hast mich. Now we're in the fourth phrase, the fourth line of the poem. Du bist. And here we see the classic extended phrase. I'm going to go back 1 second so that you can see how a fifth phrase is introduced by harmonically. Sorry, turn. Which means we have to repeat the text. Gorgeous. I know of Russian very little, but you don't need to know a lot of Russian to feel that exactly the same kind of thing is going on. I cannot tell you what that word is, because if I start speaking Russian, everybody's going to giggle. But I can tell you that this is a stressed syllable and this is an unstressed syllable, because I know my appoggiaturas and what happens, yeah? These are both different harmony notes, but it's never the same note. Now we have classic appoggiaturas. Right. These are classic ways from the Beatles to Bach, where we deal with this idea of avoiding the repeated note by writing different pitches. So the first thing you want to remember for yourself, and this is just has to do with all languages, the classic ways to avoid the repeated note. They all achieve the same goal. That is, they accentuate the stress syllable in the poetry. It can be a dissonant pitch, that's the classic appoggiatura. It can be a different harmony pitch. It can also insert an ornament between the two equal pitches, like we saw in Au va disciple de la tristesse. And we can also have variations of it. For some reason, when I went through this, all of the visuals were here, but it seems that Garcia has got lost here. But we will see it in the next slide. So practice saying. Are you ready to practice saying? So this is like the best way I can come up with. So how do you explain this to somebody? When the tonic accent of the poetic line arrives on the downbeat or the harmony change, with syllable or syllables to spare, language desires the prosodic appoggiatura. The prosodic appoggiatura is just what we call that event. Or you can say, the new harmony has arrived, but we have stragglers syllables to accommodate. The appoggiatura and its variations was and still is the solution. So there is this problem that the harmony arrives, the poem arrives, but there is another syllable. And this is the basic idea. So practice saying with me, like we'll just say it out loud. And if you paraphrase, make sure that you hit the right things, right? These are the words you need to hit. The tonic accent of the poetic line and some version of the arrival of a new harmony, because this is the place where it happens. When the tonic accent of the poetic line arrives on the downbeat or harmony change with syllable or syllables to spare, language desires the prosodic appoggiatura. Or the new harmony has arrived, but I have stragglers syllables to accommodate. And that's why I'm putting my appoggiatura. Now, this is where it's going to get interesting, because this is where I was like, okay, we're going to walk backwards in the Italian tradition. Normally we start in history and walk towards us to see how appoggiaturas, what changed and what didn't change. But I thought, since I started, with Hey Jude and roses on whiskers or whatever, favorite things, that we would walk back. And first I thought it's really crazy to look at Puccini now, because Puccini doesn't do this. But it's really interesting to look at Puccini now, because Puccini is clearly doing something completely different. Firstly, the libretto of the Verismo composers are not adhering to the same rules, which we will look at in a hot second, right? So you will see that poem doesn't look as predictable as the ones that we have seen. And when you look at the harmony, you see, when you look at that orchestration, that something completely modern is going on here. Puccini is way more modern than the Beatles, way more modern than the idea of like triads that follow each other in a pre-described way. What is this? So this poem, Vissi d'arte, vissi d'amore, clearly has stresses on vissi and arte and vissi and amore. And one could even say that you experience it as an appoggiatura, but it is not a classic appoggiatura in any way, because even though this feels like it has stress and release, it's all just chords following each other. And here we get, non feci dai male. And we have moved away from needing, because that is just not the musical world in which Puccini lives. There is something else happening. There is a dedication to a new way of thinking about harmony, a chromaticism, and a tangling of the classic ways in which triads work together, which makes the appoggiatura, the dissonance of the appoggiatura, jarring to the ear. Because what I need to hear is, I don't want to hear, and so we feel to the end, quante miserico nobia aiutai. It would just be totally impossible to imagine, no, because we are in a completely different world. He does the same in recitatives, and we will see kind of where this comes from. In old style, quanta peccata, my own aspettita. These would all have had appoggiaturas if this was a recitative by Rossini, but it's totally not by Rossini, and you can tell. Quanta peccata. Sorry. These harmonies have nothing to do with 1-4-5-1, the way it is normally. And then when we arrive here, tu fino a stasera sai fermo lavoro e mi prometto sia casa fortuna sia trecciolo. There are no appoggiaturas, and it doesn't strike as strange at all. In fact, it would make it sound like it comes from either Rossini or the Beatles. If we had mi prometti da ridoro, yeah, This is, of course, a recitative. Beatles didn't write recitative. Does that make sense? So where does this come from? What does Verdi do? In Verdi, we are still solidly in the number opera that breaks down into versi sciolti and versi lirici, okay? So this is where very often we start when we talk about these things. That is, when you look on the right-hand side, these are the poems that we have seen mostly, right? It's a very clear poem. Cortigiani vil razza dannata, per qual prezzo vendesti il mio bene. You feel that it scans in a very simple way. On the left, you have versi sciolti, which is the poetic form of the Italian recitative. While we experience it as free, because it doesn't scan in a predictable way, the way versi lirici does, it is still a poetic form and it still scans because it's all 7 and 11 syllables. Right, and most of you, this is probably not news. If this is news to you, I hope your head is exploding. That all of the recitative of classic Italian opera is all written in the verse form versi sciolti, and it all breaks down into 7 and 11 syllables. You'll see that there's always a tonic accent. Non va di letto, lune, violetta, onore, feste, avezza, and very often in recitative, we do not see this idea of apocopation. And this is an important thing to get about recitative. And that's why we feel the recitative with the line endings almost always with appoggiatura, because when you look at Cortigiani, you will see that the quatrain ends with tesor and l'onor, and all of the poems we have seen, really, except for Make It Better, has ended with this stressed syllable. So it is in the nature of Italian poetry to make the fourth line of the poem what we call tronco. We will practice saying those words in a little bit. That is, there are no straggler syllables on the fourth line of the quatrain. That is not an absolute rule, but 98% of the time, I would say. Also, even though I pulled that number out of thin air, right? But a lot of the time you will see that. So versi lirici very often ends on this like tronco. So the appoggiaturas will come on dannata, bene, sconviene, but in the versi sciolti, they come all the time, right? Because we do not see apocopation at the end of that line. What we do see at the end of the versi sciolti is the rhyming couplet. Rigenerato, and tutto il passato is rhyming. The rest of it doesn't rhyme. So how does Verdi write it in his score? In the time of Verdi, all of the appoggiaturas are notated, just the way they are notated in Rose's rainbows. Why can I not remember? Rainbows and roses and whiskers. I cannot remember how that thing starts. Like somebody put it in the chat for me. So when you look at Volaron già 3 lune, my favorite things. Da che la mia violetta, appoggiaturas are my favorite things. Agi per me lasciò. You see, lasciò does not have a straggler syllable. It doesn't need a dissonant. Dovizie, amori, e le pompose feste, tanto, oops, extra thing. Don't know how that extra, you know how many times I look through this trying to catch mistakes, but you know, there we go. You see how many there are in the aria. Cortigiani vil razza dannata, per quel prezzo vendeste il mio bene. All the time, right? They're all written out, they're all printed. If you do this with your Verdi score, putting a red arrow on every appoggiatura, they would be everywhere. Your score would be red, okay? Verdi, I cannot let go past because it is really in Verdi where we start to see the absence of the appoggiatura. And there are places where he himself is starting to do something new. And so it is really in Verdi where the convention of the appoggiatura for the Italian opera really breaks down to the point of Puccini. So I'm just going to read this because if you study this, you will often see reference to this. Often quoted as proof of the prevalence of the prosodic appoggiatura is a recitative between Rigoletto and Sparafucile. Verdi creates a thoroughly modern and stark effect by asking the singer not to sing the customary appoggiaturas. He goes further yet and eliminates the third from the chord in the orchestra, leaving it up to the voice to define the harmony. An eerie, otherworldly sound is created. Verdi is busy doing something new. This has nothing to do with tradition. Note, even though by the time of Rigoletto, the notated appoggiatura was becoming the norm, Verdi still realized that the singer might add the non-notated appoggiatura unless specifically requested to refrain from doing so. And this is the piece, the moment we are talking about. When he sings, 20, and at the top you see the original handwriting, yeah? This recitative to be sung without the customary appoggiaturas. 20 scuri e tuoretto, ecco di 10, e dopo la ridì. So when you look through it, fast through the whole recitative, you're only going to see the notes of the D major chord. If this was the recitative did not have this notation on it, this is the point we're making here. If Verdi did not in his own handwriting said, please don't add the appoggiaturas, he was absolutely expecting singers to add them because it was so much part of the tradition. So he would have imagined somebody would sing "Venti scuri ai tuoretto e con i 10 e dopo l'opera il resto." That would be a completely normal thing for a singer in Verdi's time to have done. Let's move back in time to Bellini. What does he do? This is the recitative entrance lines of Norma and the beginning of Casta Diva. You see, it looks exactly the same. We are in versi sciolti, sediziose voci, voci di guerra, and so on. And Casta Diva che in argenti. I'm putting this line at the bottom here because when you look at Il bel sembiante, I didn't have room on the next slide for it, but if you really imagine, you see just how we feel that il bel sembiante senza nube, senza vel. You see how all of those bold syllables have a dissonance on them. This is part of what it is we imagine, yeah? Here is the slide of like sediziosi voci. You see the appoggiatura is notated. Voci di guerra, it is indicated by a small note. Avvi, also at the beginning of the line. And you see them all the time. There is no place where there is this repeated note happens at the end of a line, at the end of a poetic line, where the appoggiatura does not exist. What is happening in Casta Diva? Casta Diva is basically like an ornamentation of this appoggiatura, right? If you think Casta Diva, and this is just an ornament of the appoggiatura. And he riffs by doing Ka, and he fills it with a turn. This is really the classic, the appoggiatura. If you start with a harmony note, and then the appoggiatura, or the what do you call it? Passing tone from this. Turn. We will see these in Garcia shortly. This is a simple appoggiatura. Yeah, chromatic, and there's nothing fun, more amazing than it. What does Donizetti do? Dude is inconsistent. At this point in history, we are now moving towards the time when the appoggiatura was not notated. So sometimes he notates them and sometimes he does not. It is important to understand that this represents a change in notation, not in performance practice. The appoggiaturas were always sung and was always part of the prosody, as we saw and we will keep seeing, but Now they are starting to notate it, but it is not, that completion of the evolution of notation has not been completed. So if you are Edgardo, ti face tuttavia, no, you must add it, even though Donizetti didn't write it. Ti face tuttavia, splende il castello. Now he writes, a scarsa fu la notte il tripù. No, you must add, you see? So the blue ones he added, the red ones you have to add. In grada donna, mentre io mi struggo. Chromatic, classic chromatic appoggiatura by Donizetti. Consorte, you should put. This is a very classic moment. It's a same line repeated. Once he writes it, the second time he doesn't write it. I want to die when I don't hear it the same way. It should be the same way. Or play the original. You see how morte has two A's, but you see how there's other stuff in between? That is an ornamentation of that note. We will see it in Garcia shortly. What does Rossini do? As a rule, Rossini does not notate the appoggiatura, just like his predecessors, Mozart and Handel. So if you are Cenerentola, quel che padre non è padre, onde poi le due sorelle. So if I showed you the poem, yeah, you can see how these are the tonic accents of the lines in the poem. Era vedova il mio madre, ma fu madre con quelle. Questo padre non orgoglio, questo padre non orgoglio, questo padre da da da, and so on, right? Once he gets here, he writes these different harmony notes that have that same idea. You just cannot imagine quel padre non è padre, da 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 da, because it makes a blunt ending where in fact there is a feminine ending in the poem. A quick, why did they not notate it? I'm sorry, this thing is long, so if you all need to leave and watch it on replay, I just decided I'm not going to rush myself because I always rush myself and then there are things left unsaid and then I have to do it again. So this is me talking about the appoggiatura, never to talk about it again. The convention of not notating the appoggiatura has its roots in the conventions of writing for the continuo group, low strings and harpsichord or fortepiano. So, why? In addition to the convention of notating the recitative in 4/5 time, it was customary to place the stressed syllables of the poem on beats 1 and 3. This is also where the new harmonies arrive. And it was a convention to only write consonant pitches so that the implied harmony would be really clear to the harpsichord player, right? So if you imagine all of those red arrows having dissonances on them and you see only the bass line and that dissonant note, it's very hard to tell what the harmony is. Okay, it's time to practice saying, because being able to explain why it was notated is a very strong weapon in your arsenal. Practice. Notating the dissonance in pivotal harmonic moments, those are the ends of phrases or members of phrases, would confuse the continuo group in their realization of the figured bass. Thus, as a rule, these moments are notated as consonant and the insertion of the appoggiatura is done by the singer, okay? Another way we can practice saying is how that changed. As the continuo group starts to disappear from Italian opera, so does the need for consonant notation, with no one to confuse about the intended harmony. Since it is all notated in the orchestral accompaniment, composers increasingly notate the pitches as imagined and sung in previous eras. The catching up of notation to practice happens gradually and is complete by the time of Bellini. What happens in Mozart? When we look at Porgia Amor, we see a lot of appoggiaturas written out, and without fail, they are written out if you would not have sung them under other circumstances. I'm going to look at the whole aria because it's very instructive. I've done this often with Te vieni non tardar, but not with Porgia Amor. If Porgia Amor was written because the poem is Porge amor qualche ristoro al mio duolo a miei sospir. It is not amore, because of the rules of poetry. You would not have sung an appoggiatura. So Mozart imagines it because he wants it. So he writes it, because otherwise you would not have sung it. What does happen here? If he did not write this variation, which he's imagining, you might have sung. Here, could have, is a what do you call it, harmonized appoggiatura, and it is ornamented, but not the same note on duo and lo. Again, because we have arrived at sospir and not sospire, we would have had sospir, yea, sospir. But Mozart's like, please put the appoggiatura. Oh, mi rende. No appoggiatura written, because what's happening? Orchestra is starting to play at the same time. Right, the orchestra is playing here, and you have to know that this is a simple appoggiatura. There's no reason for Mozart to notate it. You know to sing del mio tesoro or tesoro. Oh, the balancing phrase ends in a stressed syllable without stragglers. So no appoggiatura needed. I love this moment because all of these chords act like appoggiaturas. You feel how that happens? Porge amor qualche ristoro. All of the stress is at storo. God bless this anthology who puts a little asterisk and says that the appoggiatura is optional. It's not optional. It must be put there, right? Because you cannot have a blunt ending, musical ending to a female or a ending in poetry. You again, it is a tronco, it is a blunt ending poetically, but he doesn't want a blunt ending. He wants, because we're not done yet, yeah, he's going to repeat the text, and he also adds the orchestra in it. Amen. Now blend ending, blunt ending, because we have arrived at the end, because this is coda. You must put the appoggiatura, o mi lascia, blunt ending. Okay, I hope you all are not bored. What does Handel do? Oh my God, look what he does. He varies as well. This is Vadoro pupille saette d'amore. You see, I'm sad you didn't see Garcia before. You will see it soon. I put it earlier so that you could have seen it, but it disappeared. So you see that it is, but we don't experience it like that because there's a lower neighbor tone inserted. This is the third line. As expected, the fourth line ends in a truncated sen instead of seno. Everybody know this word, apoccapated, yeah? Apoccapated. Instead of seno, we have sen. This is one way that Handel deals with the problem of repeated notes. What are other ways? Piangerò la sorte mia, si crudele e tanto ria. Piangerò la sorte. A different harmony note. E crudele e tanto ria, finché vita in petto avrò. Tronco, yeah? So we have ria, da da da, yeah? Different notes on mia and ria, only one note needed on vro. Ma poi morto d'intorno, ma poi morto. Classic appoggiatura. Different harmony notes. E not notte giorno. Again, we have na, 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 but not il tiranno e notte no. If it was like that, you might have sung il tiranno e notte il giorno, which would totally sound fine. Yeah, if I put appoggiaturas there, totally sounds like Handel could have written that. Fata spettro, and so on. This is a fascinating poem. Tornami vagheggiar, te solo vuol amar, quest'anima fedel, caro mio bene. Because in fact, the first three lines are all truncated, apocryphated, and therefore becomes tronco in Italian poetry. We'll practice those words in a hot second. Tornami vagheggiar, te solo vuol amar. And I didn't put that because everybody knows how this aria goes, and it doesn't have an appoggiatura because it has tornami vagheggiar, because you understand what happens. But see what happens with caro mio bene, because when we have this unabashedly old-fashioned, there is a downbeat on the ne of bene. This is very old-fashioned and happened in the Baroque and pre-Baroque all the time. So it's fascinating because this caro mio bene allows us to feel the hemiola. Right, we feel this like moving around within the bar, and we just don't care that ne is on the downbeat, and in a later time that would have been impossible. It would have to be yeah, would have just have to be a different thing. Yeah, okay. Historic evidence. Now I'm going to try and read quickly through these things. How do we know exactly? Here are some horses from whose mouths we have these words, right? So people are always like, I heard it from the horse's mouth. I always say, pick the right horse. Yeah, you can not quote any horse. Different horses for different courses. And the horse for this course, in this case, Tosi. Tosi was a castrato singer, composer, and writer on music. He was born in Cesena in Italy. He lived in London. He was a founding member of the Academy of Ancient Music. His most famous treatise is called Opinione di Cantori Antiche e Moderne, and it is sometimes quoted as the first full-length treatise. It is available in English as observations on the florid song. Since we are going to talk a lot about Italian version stuff now, or we have been talking already, let's just practice saying these words. These are the terms for how we describe when a line ends in Italian. It can end piano. That is a word that ends in a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable, like the word piano and 7 million others in Italian. Then sdrucciolo, sdrucciolo. It's a nice big word to throw at people to clarify that you know what you're talking about. That is how we describe a word that ends in a stressed syllable followed by two unstressed syllables. That would be true for the word sdrucciolo or tavola. Yeah, that's how you can remember. Piano is a piano, sdrucciolo is a sdrucciolo, and then tronco, the one that I referred to before, a word that ends in a stressed syllable. That can either be Sara or già, that's words that end on a stressed syllable in any case, or that also applies to the apocryphated words we saw, that if we have honor instead of onore. Onore is a piano word, but honor is a tronco. These are all in the Vakai project. I'm not sure if I should, I'm not going to read all of them. I was going to read all of them, but, I don't think it's going to be exciting. I think if you listen to this again, you can pause and screenshot or just pause the recording and read it. This is Tosi Telemann, maybe read Telemann. In recitative, it is to be remembered that it should not follow an equal beat, but rather be sung following the content of the poetry, sometimes slower or faster. On top of that, singers must take into account that they must not always sing the notes as they are notated. Rather, every now and again should use what are known as accents, and then explains the use of the appoggiatura. I do. It is sad to miss Tosi, because Tosi's quote ends with, "Poor Italy, pray tell me, do not the singers nowadays know where the appoggiaturas are to be made, unless they are pointed at with a finger? In my time, their own knowledge showed it them." I totally suggest you read Tosi. He has so much passion for our topic. Corri, we will see in a second a little more of. Mingozzi, this is just to prove that the French did it the Italian way, right? This is from Mingozzi's Méthode de chant from 1804, where he explains that you do it in French music the same way you do it in Italian. Garaudet, also from the Paris Conservatory, explains the same. And here is the little list that ran away from one of my previous slides. This is the different ways you can vary the appoggiatura. And we have seen all of them, from Ambroise Thomas to the Beatles, to Mozart, to Handel, to Bellini. We have seen this idea that instead of this, you can write or this, and you can do this. These are all just variations on it, or how you can play with to avoid having the repeated note. Again, you can pause and read about Garcia. If you read only one treatise in your life, it should be Garcia. Extremely connected. He was the son of the famous tenor, also called Manuel Garcia, and was also the inventor of the laryngoscope. So there are lots of people who are into Garcia in the voice science world as well. Yeah, had a very, very famous family and had a huge influence in many, many ways. That treatise is still quoted as the very, very best to explain the singing of this period. Let's practice saying. While the appoggiatura is also used as a melodic ornament, the prosodic appoggiatura results from poetic stress. This is how to get the word prosodic appoggiatura in there, because people are like, well, that's an ornament. Well, it is not an ornament if it's used to do the prosodic stress in the rules, according to the rules laid out by the old theorists. Does that make sense? The idea of like where you use it as melodic ornament can be a matter of opinion and taste, but the prosodic appoggiatura is a historical fact. Here's one of my favorite slides. People are like, oh, well, if you put all of the appoggiaturas, it loses its meaning. The appoggiatura, the dissonance of the appoggiatura has nothing to do with the meaning of the word. It has to do with how it stands. Practice saying orrore and amore scan the same way. They both have a piano ending. They end on a stressed and an unstressed syllable, and thus the stressed syllable takes an appoggiatura if found at the end of a phrase or a member of a phrase. It has nothing to do with meaning. It has to do with prosody. It has to do with the scanning of the poem, not what the poem means. You can read about Domenico Corri, who is quoted very often, and the most famous thing that I think that we keep seeing everywhere. If you read anybody writing about ornamentation or historical performance practice of this time, you will see this example. This comes from a select collection of songs and duets from operas in the highest esteem from 1780. And it shows you in a little table how it's notated, the original manner, and then how you should sing it. One of the most famous things in this collection is a version of Che farò senza Euridice. Here, for interest, I put a screenshot really of how the classic libretto looks, because we've only looked at versi lirici and versi sciolti kind of like separate, right? So you'll see that the versi lirici, the poem of the recitative is flush left, and then the aria Che farò senza Euridice is set in right, tabbed in, and that is how you in classic good librettos will find it written. That clarifies what is versi sciolti and what is versi lirici. I put on the slide so that you can remember if you don't know the words. All of the lines in versi sciolti are settenari or endecasillabi, 7 or 11 syllable lines, okay? Che farò senza Euridice is an ottonario that is, it has 8 syllables, and it has both piano and tronco endings. As expected, we find the tronco endings at the end of stanzas. Fidel, cel, and ben, all 3 of them apocryphated. And if we count those syllables, even when we count 7 syllables, they are still counted as 8 syllables in Italian poetry. This is just like a recap. If you want to know more about this stuff, it's in the book, or talk to me. We'll do more of these things. When the poem in a line in an ottonario is only 7 syllables, because it ends in tronco, it is called an ottonario sdrucciolo, or if you are talking about 3 of them, and they are ottonari sdruccioli. This, I am not going to talk through all of it. I will go slowly through the slides so that people can make either screenshots or look at it, pause at it. Here I have marked where there are variations. That is not a simple appoggiatura, for example, sposa instead of sposa, or Euridice, yeah. I have also marked where it is really a substitute, that is Euridice. In this place, of course, is not a dissonant note, it's just a different harmony note. I have also marked where the appoggiatura is not obligatory, that's in the middle of the line. For example, at the end of the slide, più non vive does not have to take the appoggiatura. Più non vive if you don't want, yeah? Oh, at the bottom of this slide, just for interest, we want to start looking at why we can trust certain sources, right? So get into the habit of dating your material. Orfeo's premiere was in 1762. We see at the top of the slide, sung by Signor Guadagni, and he was in London in 1770. It's quite possible that Corri might have heard him. We don't know for sure, but he certainly, Corri is suggesting that this is how Guadagni sang it, or might have sung it, or a version of what Guadagni sang. And this score comes from 1779. So from the premiere of Orfeo to this version that we are seeing are only, whatever, 17 years or something like that, okay? I will go through these slides, pause the YouTube video if you want to look at all of them. There is a lot of information. This is both in recitative and aria, so you will see that we still have yes, this is the first time of the aria. Yeah, Signor Guadagni and Signor Corri clearly did not get the idea that, first you should sing it without ornaments because it's so pure. That's a modern idea, right? I'm just going to leave the music so pure in the beginning. That is a modern idea. They often ornamented from the beginning, and then when it came again, they ornamented it again and more, okay? Don't want to go too fast so that you can pause if you are looking through this again. This is available on IMSLP if you don't have the Vakai project. A short moment about the Schirmer, what I call the Schirmer anthologies of the past. If you're a BCBC member, you have seen this many times. This is an exercise book, or like if I compare it to the Schirmer anthologies or whatever anthology you have, right? These are books that were compiled by teachers for their students. And in this example, we have a lot of information, because if you look clearly, you will see that the person who made the edition put the small notes where the appoggiaturas should come, or they think it should come. And then somebody with a pencil, presumably the maestro who was teaching, rubbed out either the small note or the big note in order to say what they thought would be in good taste. But what you will find when you go through it, I will go through all of the slides as well so that you can pause and look at all of it, is that none of the classic appoggiaturas that are required by the rules of Tosi, Corri, Garcia are rubbed out, right? It's only the ones that are optional. Here again, I will not read all of it. This is again about dating the research, right? How do we know what we're looking at? I will maybe just go for, when you look at these things, you will very often see information about who it was written for, or who it was dedicated to, the ornaments, or where it was printed. Here we can see it was printed in London, and we have the address of the printer. And so this next slide, if you want to pause the recording and read all of it, will give you all of the information about what we can learn from just looking at the information about that. And so we will see at the end of it, our example, the deduction of the information, that I will not read all of it, is that this was printed and used sometime between 1810 and 1830. And this would easily have been during Mozart's time if he lived as long as Haydn, right? We're trying to show that it is connected to the time of Mozart, so that people don't think that it is a romantic version. Here are one of my favorite things to practice saying. If Mozart lived as long as Haydn, he would have been 60 at the premiere of Il Barbiere di Siviglia, 74 for Anna Bolena, and 75 for Norma. Style does not cut as easily into courses and semesters as some would have you believe, right? It's like, just because somebody dies young does not mean that you cannot, that Mozart is as far removed from Rossini, Donizetti, and Bellini as you think. As we have seen, the music looks much more alike, in fact, than you might expect. I already explained what this was going to be. This is the Versi Sciolti, just so that you know that you have looked at that. Note how the Versi Sciolti looks exactly like the others we have encountered and you will encounter in your life. It was a long tradition that all the great classic librettists adhere to. Even though in Mozart it says, "E Susanna non vien, sono ansiosa." If you count that, you'll be like, oh, Da Ponte made a mistake. In fact, he didn't. In the Da Ponte libretto, it's "E Susanna non viene, sono ansiosa," which comes to 11 syllables. Here I will pause again through. This will be very self-explanatory. Otherwise, we will be here until 4 o'clock, which we cannot do. Okay, I'm going to just pause. You will see. So yeah, so if you look, let's just look at the first line. I literally told myself I was going to do all of this note by note, but now that I'm doing it, I'm like, you all are going to die, and maybe I will as well. And since we're recording it, you'll be able to go back, yeah, and see. So, "E Susanna non vien," right, which are like exactly 2 appoggiaturas more than you basically will ever hear in the modern world. And the maestro who used this absolutely seemed to have loved both of them. "E Susanna non vien," but you can see that I marked them pink because they are optional. You in fact don't have to do them because Susanna is in the middle of the line and vien is tronco. And if you sang viene, you would have to do it, right? And so we can look through all of it and explain all of the appoggiaturas as suggested, and whether they are accepted or rejected by the person who used the score. Here's another way you can practice. Whenever there are 2 or 3 of the same pitches at the end of a phrase or a member of a phrase, we support the prosodic accent with an appoggiatura. Or you can say, whenever you punctuate, whether you breathe or not, you place an appoggiatura if there are 2 or 3 of the same pitches. Always. The simplest way to explain the appoggiatura is to say the dissonance of the appoggiatura and its resolution support the stressed and unstressed syllables of the poem. But if your audience is not really well versed in what all of those things mean, you need to unpack it. And that was really the purpose of all of the other practice saying it slides. Now I'm going to stop the share and